Hey guys, and welcome to episode 5 of the React Crash Course. In the previous episode, we looked at state and how we can manage, manipulate and create data for our app. We also looked at forms and how they can tie into the state to start adding new entries to our team app. In this episode, we're going to look at the useEffect hook, which becomes the vital part of any app, as it controls how you load, manage and listen for changes on your data. So let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to do is head into our team members component, which if you remember, we're loading 3 static team members into our state and then outputting them on the screen. Now I've gone ahead, let me just remove that. So I've gone ahead and just cleaned up some of our functions to remove the console log so that we can focus on the useEffect hook. Now in order to use the useEffect, the first thing you need to do is import it in, and you add it to this line 2, and it's part of the React library. So again, we just do useEffect, and we're now importing that library into our app. And you'll notice that in the log here it's saying useEffect is defined but never used. So let's go ahead just below the state items and hit useEffect, and we'll initiate that function or that hook. Now the first parameter that this needs is a function. So we'll define an empty function, and then after that function we need to use comma and then put an empty array. Now within this array we're going to enter anything that this useEffect is dependent on. At the moment it's not dependent on anything, so we just put an empty array. If you fail to put an empty array or dependence in here, you will either get error messages or this useEffect will just continually run. So to show you what happens, inside of here we'll console log page loading and hit save, and there we go, refresh page loading. So this is the default behavior of the useEffect. As the page loads and it gets to this section, it's going to run any code that you put in the middle. Now one of the first use cases really for useEffect would be loading data, especially if you're loading from an API. So instead of us defining our team members in here, let's go ahead and just cut those team members, and we'll pop in an empty array. And if we hit save, you'll see we now have no team members because there are none in the state. And inside of our useEffect, we'll call the set team members function, and we'll pop our team members in there. If we hit save, you'll notice that the team members are now loading. So this is the perfect example that if you were pulling data from an API, for example, if we were storing all these team members in the database, then we could call a function in here to hit that endpoint, pull back the team members and load them into our state. Now the next thing we need to do, because this useEffect is now dependent on set team members, is pop set team members in here. There we go. So every time the page loads, it's going to hit this useEffect, grab our team members and load them into the state, which is why they're now showing again on the screen. The second thing you can do is, or the second thing to note, is that you can have as many useEffects as you want. Now it's quite common for people that start using the useEffect hook to put all of their code inside of one useEffect. But it could be that we want to do something that's dependent on the team members in our state changing. So after this useEffect, we could define another one, useEffect, brackets, pop in our empty function, and we could build a useEffect that's dependent on listening to changes to our team member state. So we'll pop in after here, team members. So what this is going to do, if we console log team members changed and hit save, refresh the page, so you can see there team members changed. And that's because as we've loaded this page, originally team members was an empty array, and then we've used this useEffect to set the team members, which has meant this team member state object is changed. And that's exactly what's triggered this useEffect. It's loaded once on load, and then it's because the state has changed, and then it's loaded again because the team members item has changed. But let's find a proper use case for this. So if we think maybe about this drop down that's showing all of the departments on our page, at the moment we're statically setting those departments in that drop down. Now that's fine because we know that we're only loading team members with Department of Development, Finance and Management. But it could be that when we go back and add a new person with a new department, we add a department that's not currently used. So we'll head back up to the state and we'll set departments and set departments into our state, and we'll initiate that with an empty array. And if we head back down to our select, we can say that instead of statically loading them, we want to statically load all departments, but then after that we're going to map through the departments from our state, di, and we're going to return an option with a value of d, and we'll pop the department name out in there, and we can now remove these static options. So when we load the page, at the moment we've only got all departments because we're not setting anything to this department state, and that's the perfect example of what we can use the useEffect for. So once the team members change, we'll remove this line. What we want to do is iterate through the team members and pick up any unique departments to load them into our department state, which will in turn fill this list of departments. Now we want to do that asynchronously, so to give you an example of how you would do that, you literally do two empty brackets, and inside of this you can say async and define an asynchronous function. And again, this is the perfect for doing things like pulling data from APIs, because you'll probably want to wait for the result before you update the state. So we'll say let underscore departments equals, and we'll set all departments as the only item in there. So we're setting a new array with all departments, and then we're going to for await let t of team members. So we're going to iterate through the team members, and we're going to say if our new departments array doesn't include the t dot department, then departments dot push the department. And then finally, outside of this loop, we're going to say set departments. And because now set departments is a dependency of this useEffect, we're just going to go ahead and add that in here, set departments, and hit save. And we have this error: each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So that's one thing we've forgotten to do in our options, is to pass a key through, and hit save. We'll refresh the page. There we go, that error's disappeared. So just to recap, we've got our first useEffect, which loads on page load, which sets the team members. We have our second useEffect, which is listening for any team member changes and running this function, which is going to iterate through each team member, create a departments array, and then set departments. If we look at this drop down, we now have two all departments, and that's because we need to change this. So departments, refresh the page. Right, that's because we're loading a default item here, which we don't need to do. So we could have defined the first option of all departments here and then not included it here, but we'll remove that. There we go. So we've now got all departments, development, finance, management, and back to all departments. So what's going to happen now, if we hit add team member and we hit a new team member of Roger in engineering, which is a department that we've not previously loaded in here, and hit add team member, we'll see that Roger has been added to our list and that our all departments drop down now contains engineering. And that's because as we added that new team member, we manipulated this team member state, and our second useEffect was looking for any changes to that team member's state item and running this code, which creates a new array with a default of all departments, adds any departments from the team members that don't currently exist in this array, and that in turn has caused the DOM to refresh, which has added engineering to, or not just added engineering, but reloaded all of the departments into this select component. Another example of using this type of useState function would be if we wanted to change the header of our app when somebody clicked add new team member, and we could therefore, for example, pass through a function from our header to be able to update from our app component to update the title of our app, and then using the useEffect we could look for changes. So when somebody clicks the button, we call that function that we've passed through to update the header. And we'll look at that in more detail in the next episode when we get into things like React Router and loading different components on the page depending on what we want to show the user. The final thing to mention about the useEffect hook is you can also return. So if you were, for example, to hit return, an empty function, and inside of there console.log I've finished. Anything you return from the useEffect will run when that component has finished. So if we were navigating through various pages and we hit this page and then went back, that's going to cause this return to run. Now, there aren't too many examples of when you would use this, but it could be really good, for example, cleaning up your code, checking that something is loaded properly before you go back to the next page, or cancelling anything like listeners if you're listening to the window resizing, or if you're listening for on-clicks of the page, you could cancel that listener by returning a function to your useEffect. So that's the useEffect hook and how it can be used to run code on component load when something in that component state changes and when that component's finished. In the next episode, we're going to look at React Router, which is perfect for navigating through different pages and deciding which components to show our users. If you've enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate the like. And if you want to be notified when I upload new videos, make sure you hit the subscribe button.